The growls of several walkers echoed in the forest, the sun set streaks of orange splashing on Clementine's face as her feet took in one direction as fast as she could. Behind her, one of the armed charge was stumbling and breathing heavily as he struggled to keep up. She didn't want it to stop. She truly wanted to just leave him to the walkers and get to Parker's Run and meet up with her real friends. But everything would have been for nothing if she did. She did what she had to save him for nothing. "Hurry!" Clementine hissed. She whipped around and clamped her hand around the camouflage fabric of Troy's jacket, yanking him along as his pace began to slow down. He was panting, pain gasps leaving his lips as they ran along. It became clear he couldn't keep running. "Slow down, you little," he wheezed, the usual venom in his voice disguising fatigue. No, she absolutely couldn't slow down, not with the walkers behind them, snarling and hunting them like prey. Her fingers clasped as her sleeves tighter, refusing to let go, and stopped dragging him. "The walkers are following us," she replied sharply, her tone almost patronizing. "You know we can't slow down." Slowing down meant surrendering, which means immediate, assured death. Couldn't Troy see that, even in his injured state? He looked at the verge of passing out. His skin was paling and his eyes were forming a hazy glaze over them. But something kept him on his feet. Maybe it was the pure fear of what would happen if they stopped, or stubbornness that he couldn't let go of. Whatever the case may be, Clementine was glad that he wasn't collapsing, because it would mean the end, as she couldn't very well carry him, nor did she want to. Troy had to keep himself alive at this point. She couldn't help much longer anymore. And so they raced through the forest, Clementine asking which way to go, and Troy providing directions as best he could in his condition, and she could only hope that they were in the right track. They weren't on the set path with signs anymore, which made things a lot of a hell of easier. But no, someone had to suggest they take the forest route. The certain someone that seemed to forget that he was missing one of his limbs and had lost probably half of the blood in his body. How did she kept managing to get into unlucky situations like this? Well, there were literally mindless creatures following the two of them through the forest, and the common companion was just as about useful as sips of apple juice that had been numbed to pain of sewing her open gash. How perfect. Speaking of, that would have still bothered her at times when she moved her arm the wrong way, but luckily her jacket, the same one that Troy had scorned, was keeping her from getting jerked or cut in deeper. In that way, coo-cooing it until it scabbed over and became a scar. Troy's injury was a bit different. This would take much longer to heal, at least until it finally stopped dripping blood. The bandages were deep red by now, and the rope keeping the blood from flowing clotted, also painted the crimson color. But it was leaving a trail behind them longer, and he may not be completely out of danger, but it was in the step in the right direction. Up there! We're gonna turn left." Troy's muttered snapped Clementine out of her thoughts. She gave out a nod to him and shifted them into the direction that they indicated. Do you see the path up the hill?" he continued, his voice growing quieter. She lifted his head. Indeed, just as he indicated, the trees fanned out until they dissolved into a small open space, a nearby hill sloping upwards. It didn't look too steep, and Clementine could scarcely see the markings of a path at the top. If Troy had been correct, and she hoped that he wasn't lying at this point, but she knew that people like him, they just had to follow the path of the signs that pointed to Parker's Run. They would be easy once they made it up that hill. Crunching through the fallen leaves littered at her feet, the girl paused and sized up the hill, her gaze flickering to her companion. "Do you think you'll still be able to get up that hill?" she asked, honestly unsure of his capabilities. It didn't look like much for her, but she was small and agile, and he was missing an arm. He didn't seem to be eager to show his weakness, however. Rolling his eyes, and the Nan snapped. "Of fucking course I can. It's not like a steep, Clementine. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, literally." With no further comment, he marched up to the slope, and after a moment's hesitation, he started to climb. It was some sort of pathetic to watch. He wasn't making much progress, struggling at the top near the bottom, with his stump arm twitched as he meant to move and crawl up the hill. But once he realized that it wouldn't work, he attempted to save the face and used non-dominant hand to keep his balance. With a sigh, Clementine grabbed his jacket again and began dragging him up the hill, which according to him, it wouldn't be a problem. She may not see him as a definite friend anymore, but that didn't mean she had to trust in his word. Clearly, he didn't even know his own strength or lack of forth. Troy, of course, didn't even like her decision, but she really hardly cared. Quit it! God damn it! Let me go! He growled, wriggling in her grasp as attempting to pry her off. Obviously, however, it didn't work, and he just looked silly in his attempts. Quiet! The girl snapped in response, her expression clearly not amused. Be an adult and quit whining for once. For God's sake, she was 11, and she was not acting this bad. How did someone like this survive in the Carver's community for as long as he did? It remained a mystery to her. After a few more minutes of struggling, well, more likely, Troy desperately tried to flail out of her grasp, and Clementine only gripping that much tighter, if it's to spite him. They finally made it up the hill. It didn't seem like much until they found it, but with the amount of effort she used to merely get up, Clementine already felt a bit tired, but the sleep could wait, as they needed to get to Parker's Run and quickly. She was worried about the others. After all, the small group of walkers didn't look like much, but she had seen people die going up against the smaller amounts. But it did make her nervous, not having anyone familiar or friendly around her. But she needed to be brave. Lee had taught her well. Once they were safely back on in the inclined path of the hill that led to, she let go of her companion's jacket. He was glaring fiercely at her and moved to smack her, but the injury had slowed him considerably, and she was able to dodge out of his way in time. "Don't hit me," she scolded, as if she was a child. "You frickin' dragged me up there," he shot back, still catching his breath. With a deadpan expression, Clementine replied, "Well, you weren't making much progress yourself. I was helping you getting up the hill." The man obviously didn't think it was funny. "Yeah, right," he hissed, his teeth gnashed down together in anger. Well, anyway, this path leads straight to the museum." Pointing, he indicated the dirt path road that spread out before them, stretching out towards the horizon. She held her gaze ahead and clenched her hand around the cleaver that's hilt just in case. "When we get there," she began, scanning her eyes for surroundings, "we're going to wait for the others, unless they're already there." "What about my arm?" "What about it?" She looked at him. Not knowing how much brighter red the bandages had become, it didn't look infected. Not that so she could tell, but to be fair, it was already bleeding through the tourniquet a bit. It was just dripping slightly for now, like a sink faucet that someone forgot to turn off all the way. But she realized that it could soon be a steady stream of blood that Troy couldn't afford to lose any more of. "Oh," she whispered, his voice concern making sense now. "When we meet up with the others, we'll have someone change the bandages," she offered, biting one of the inside of her cheek absentmindedly. "I'm sure Sarita could help again. She did it before." It didn't seem right to make Sarita his caretaker, though Clementine had been the one who forced him into the group with her split-second decision after all. Maybe someone should change the bandages. But it wasn't like she was squeamish. That side of her decayed a long time ago, after seeing how gruesome everyday life had become. Sewing up the huge gash on her own arm helped numb her the gore to it as well. "Or I could," she added thoughtfully, unsure of where she was going with her response now. Hopefully when he got to the point, it would be taken care of, no matter who was doing it. Scoffing, Troy didn't respond, focusing on his own thoughts of what was ahead of them. Clementine rolled her eyes and followed suit, gazing at the building at the end of the path. Judging by the big sign outside reading Parker's Run, it seemed to be the exact place that they were meant to go. There were no signs of the others, unfortunately, but the area was big enough to start scouting for supplies and safe spots. Once they have reached the actual museum at the end of the path, in the shambles, he could possibly be still holding some treasures. Clementine turned to Troy. "You look pale," she muttered. "You should probably sit down for a bit." She gestured to a corner of the first floor of the building, by some displays of Civil War relics. Troy didn't need to be told twice. Without a word, he obeyed, walking over to the corner and sitting down on low in his head and breathing heavily. She didn't feel sorry for him, but it was still some sort of sad to watch. He had been powerful enough once, albeit to an asshole. "Oh, fuck," he muttered under his breath. Watching him settle down and keeping an eye out for any danger around, Clementine decided to look around the museum for a bit. There wasn't much left in the terms of displays, but it was all withstanding in quite a bit of interesting. Maps and battle strategies were behind the glass cases, indicating specific events of the Civil War. Clementine hadn't gotten to learn about that in school before the world changed, but all she could think about was while scavenging was Lee. Lee would have loved this place, she murmured under her breath, the hollowness washing over her. She missed Lee so much. It felt like just yesterday he was by her side. Every time she was reminded of him, a part of her heart felt as if though it'd been ripped out, and she knew that she would never get those parts of herself back either. Dragging her gaze from the display, the memories associated with it, Clementine continued to look around for items, noticing a gray coat seated on the inside of the broken exhibits. She picked it up, examining it furtively, before turning to Troy. "Do you think Rebecca would like this?" she asked. The woman was probably getting closer to giving birth than she let on, and still even, she could use something to keep her warm if they were going to keep heading north. The man struggled weakly, a glaze over his eyes. "It's a comforter-knit coat, you know." Glancing down, Clementine realized that he was right. Omid had told her once about the confidence and the union of the Civil War, but hadn't got to explore much deeper than that. She did remember Omid saying the Confidence coat had gray coats, though she was a bit surprised that Troy knew that. But then again, it seemed like to be common knowledge. "It's still a coat," she pointed out, shrugging to herself. It would be up to Rebecca if she was going to accept it or not. Clementine seriously doubted she'd have an issue with it. Things like this were so petty nowadays. Everything could be useful, despite their sour origins. Actually, that thought applied to Troy as well. Maybe he could prove his worth by cleansed up a bit of his attitude a little. She handed him the coat off to the man and continued to look around, noticing a slightly sealed opening to a small office-like room. Tilting her head, Clementine crouched down and peered inside. "There's a huge tub of fresh water in there," she exclaimed, her eyes simmering the clean and looking at the container just out of reach. "I think I could squeeze in there to get it." However, just before she could do, a small chirping noise echoed through the ruins of the museum. It was a faint, but she could manage to hear it in the quietness of her surroundings. Clutching her meat cleaver tightly, she looked around, following the sound until she found the source. A fluffy small raccoon was poking around the opposite side of the building, sniffling and clawing at the ground for anything edible. She stared at it wide-eyed, and then looked back at Troy. She didn't want his advice or anything, but she just wanted to see if he saw it. And he did, eyes a bit wider. He then leaned forward and gazed at the animal, eyes flicking back to Clementine. Now he whispered, "Go get it. We could use a decent meal." She did wanted to say that if he wanted the damn thing so badly, he could get it himself, but she knew he couldn't do that. With an audible sigh, she then turned back towards the raccoon and silently crept towards it, its eyes fixated on the black and gray pellet. Indeed, it would make a great meal, especially for the weaker members of their party. Holding their breath, Clementine leapt forward, arms outstretched ready to grab the animal. Once she moved, however, the raccoon was alerted to their presence, thus making it edible to dodge or rather slow, attempted to pounce. It chirped wildly, as if anger with her to attempting to grab it, and scurried further into the museum. It passed Troy, who made a pitiful motion to snatch it, but merely hissed at him in response. His eyes wide, and he brought it up to his hand in defense, watching it climb over his legs with no care to his comfort. No doubt it scratched up his legs with its claws and moved on, darting towards the back of the ruins outside once more. Clementine flashed a glare at Troy, who just gave her one fierce fight right back at her. "What the shit was that? You could have done a better job," he asked, huffing. She merely just crossed her arms and rolling her eyes. "You didn't do such a very good job," she grumbled, "and you wanted to get it." Don't act like you wanted a wanted either. It was a goddamn meal, and it could have fed a lot of us. Troy snapped, probably focused on the fact that he would be fed as well. She shrugged. Well, sorry, we weren't fast enough. We're the only two people, well, 1.5 people to be precise. But she was keeping that amusing thought to herself. Troy just sighed, leaning further into the wall, his eyes slipping and closed briefly. Awkwardly, Clementine fidgeted with her cleaver, flipping around it and inspected the bloody blade absent-mindedly. Something that has been bothering me, kid. Troy began breaking through the silence for a moment. She tried to meet his gaze, but he was staring at the ground and thought. What is it? She asked. Why did you do it? The question was so quiet, she almost felt like she had imagined it. She had trouble comprehending such a small sound that came from Troy. Troy, who had yelled and barked at the camp like a lapdog he was. Troy, who had been screamed his lungs off when the blade sliced through his flesh. Troy, who had complained the whole day to Parker's Run and even yelled at her not being able to catch a raccoon. I was as good as dead, he continued, voice still uncharacteristically soft, and yet you looped over my bitten arm off without my freaking hesitation. I was a weak link, and I should have died because of that. At least that's what Bill would have say, so why? Eyes widened. She pondered the actual meaning of his words before choosing to answer. She had thought about it before, and of course, her doubting whether or not she had done the right thing. He'd probably never had thanked her for the action, but it meant something to have her save a human being's life. Maybe it was a harsh way that the world has now prompted to choose, with a more righteous path. It was what Lee would have done, and she was sure of it. It was Lee's path and was also the furthest from Carver's. You may have been weak, and Carver would have considered you as someone thrown away. That much is true, and they both knew it. However, there was a difference between Carver's philosophy and what remained in humanity in them all. She spoke firmly with her held head and sighed, repeating the words she had once heard before. But that is not how the world works now.